Yes, hello again, it is I, the conspicuous Moo. And, as promised today, we are going to talk about mistweaving. Now, we're going to go over, what some of the things that I think is great about mistweaving, some of the things that are not so great about mistweaving. We'll take a look back into the past at things that have been taken away that could well be brought back in some way. Do a bit of brainstorming about how we can improve the Mistweaver class as it currently stands. And then I'll just leave the floor open to you guys to, have a bit of a chat about it, get a few ideas together, and then we'll start bombarding Blizzard with it for 9.1. So, I guess we better get cracking. First of all, I think it's important to clarify that I'm not a Mistweaver who is a mythic raider. I am a heroic raider at best. And if you've been watching my streams, I'm not a particularly good raider. I do not have a battle command rating of over 9,000. I'm just someone who's rather passionate about the class and been learning as I go. I've been getting into the fist weaving side of it, and I'm just very passionate about it. I want to see if I can work out a few of the kinks that are in it. Anyway, let's start with the positive things, and first off, I am super positive about the way that Renewing Mist and Vivify work together. You put out your Renewing Mists, you apply your Vivifies, and anything that has a Renewing Mist on it gets a Vivified Cleave. It's a very, very clever way of doing things. It's a very, very different way of doing things than a lot of the other healers. So there's a bit of originality there, and it keeps you on your toes. It makes sure that Renewing Mist and Vivify are both very, very important spells. And at the moment, at least in 9.0.5, they're going to be getting some mana cost reductions as well, which should make us a little better. Secondly, Upwelling versus Rising Mist, or essentially actual, traditional mistweaving as opposed to fist weaving. Casting from range and being much more of a traditional stand at the back kind of healer. And then, you can take the Rising Mist option, probably with Chi-Ji. Although, there are some situations where you might prefer to take Refreshing Jadewind, particularly when you've got an awful lot of melee stacked behind a boss and you don't have a lot of movement going on. I would say something along the lines of most of Shriekwing, for example, Hungering Devourer, fights like that. Anyway, yes, you do have two distinct healing styles, and at the moment I think it's generally considered that Rising Mist is the stronger one. The fist weaving one is the stronger one, just in terms of the damage it can do and the healing that it can put out as well. With the right legendaries you can put out a substantial amount of damage just by punching people in the buttocks. And there's also quite a difference in the amount of mana consumption you're talking about as well. If you go absolutely balls to the wall with Rising Mist, you won't spend nearly as much mana as you would with an Upwelling build, particularly with the large amount of Vivify cleaving you'll be doing as well. So, they're sort of saying, well, Upwelling is a slightly easier way of doing Mistweaving, but it will come at a cost. Mostly mana, so, you're going to have to be a little more careful there, as opposed to Rising Mist, where you're actually, traditionally getting in there as the melee healer, and doing most of your legwork is literally Rising Sun Kicks. Can't go past the mobility. I mean, this is a monk class staple anyway, but, your Chi torpedoes, and you've got your portals, and, you've got plenty of ways to get out of situations. It's so much ability, and, you can actually augment it with other things. I mean, I've got engineering. I'm going back to the Night Fae again, so I'll have Soul Shape as well. I'm a big fan of Chi Torpedo. It's just a selfish choice that I prefer to make. And but yes, you've got an awful lot of moving around ability. It makes you very useful for seeds on Artificer Zymox, stuff like that. It's always been one of my favourite aspects of the class, and it certainly doesn't disappoint with Mistweavers. But do you remember Mistwalk? I remember Mistwalk. It was fun while it lasted. I also really like the melee healing mechanics. Now, it's a very, very unique way to play. And, the teaching of the monastery built in, you hit your Rising Sun Kick on cooldown, and, you've got all this other stuff going on around you, and you still have to be aware of boss mechanics, but you also have to make sure that you're doing a decent rotation to keep your HPS up. It's really, really quite engaging, and I personally find it far, far more interesting than that traditional stand back and, cast your spells and sidestep to the left when an orange thing comes and move back. It's not very interesting. So yeah, I like, I'm a bit of a melee fan, so I like to get in there, and this is definitely a class that fits me very well in that respect. Also, let's celebrate the tankiness of this. We've got Fortified Brew, we've got dampen harm, we've got diffuse magic. You know, we can put all sorts of hots upon us. You know, we've got life cocoon if things get really bad. You know, we are just a generally very, very tanky healer. I mean, compared to playing a holy priest, which is, you know, or any priest for that matter, just seems to be like paper. I'm sure disc is a lot more solid, but I haven't had a chance to try that one out yet. But you know, I do like that we are pretty solid in general. Now we get into things that Mistweaver aren't so hot at. Oh, see what I did there? Never mind. So in terms of damage reduction tools, we have very, very little outside of Life Cocoon, which is fine in its own way, but you know, you're not exactly a disc priest in this thing. You can cast only once every 2 minutes. It's a great little lifesaver. It works very well on HOTS, which is very much what we are about. HOTS being heals over time, for those of you who don't know the acronym. But you know, outside of that, you know, we are still primarily a throughput healer. You know, we out heal death basically, and so you know that leaves us with a few limitations, and it does make us pale in comparison to a lot of other healers who bring that sort of, you know, damage reduction abilities, like shamans, paladins, discipline priests in particular. We also lack what is technically known as Booyah Amazeballs cooldowns. You know, revival is fine. You know, revival is actually quite useful in some situations. In Castle Nathria, for example, when you know, for whatever reason, you know, a cast from Frida has got off during council and everyone's got that debuff, you can just cleanse it off. It's useful in the rat boss, you know, after Huntsman. Because everyone gets disease and they're up to 30 stacks and said, well, there's no way we can cleanse that, and you know, the DPS are shouting, cleanse me, as if we can't notice the debuffs on our bars. Not that that triggers me at all, but you know, you can just wipe it all off in one hit. But other than that, we don't have anything else. You know, we don't. You know, if you look at someone, you know, a similar throughput healer, such as a holy priest, you know, they can choose Holy Word Salvation, Symbol of Hope, Divine Hymn. You know, they've got an awful lot of, you know, really, you know, raid-wide tuned abilities which can put out some absolutely astonishing healing when things go a little sideways. And, you know, we just don't seem to have something like that. You know, revival is not going to fix you if you're in serious trouble. Mana conservation, well, I think anyone who's been playing Mistweaver for any amount of time will know that, you know, mana conservation has been a bit of an issue. It looks like it is being at least partially addressed in 9.0.5, that's what the patch notes say so far anyway. But you do have to be a little more careful than on other healers, I find anyway. I'm still doing the taking the potions of sacrificial anima, and it's been actually recommended by a couple of my commenters as well as one that's probably a very, very good idea. Instead of having to hit manatee, you can also just, you know, use this, and you know, your next 4 abilities, depending on their will take your health instead of your actual mana. You know, only add up to about 28% of your health, and you should be able to heal through that quite easily, especially in a raid environment where you're not the only healer and there's plenty of other stuff bouncing around. There are a number of abilities that seem a little bit too expensive for what they do. This may actually be a problem with me just not being very good at it right now, but I do find myself in situations during the course of a raid where I, you know, have everything out and there's a lot of raid-wide damage going out. Essence Fire's on cooldown. I guess I could Vivify Cleaver, that's going to cost a lot of mana. I don't have that recovery tool, so this kind of ties into the Booyah Amazeballs cooldowns. You know, when you have a raid-wide problem, we're not all that good at dealing with it. At least I'm not, so I haven't really found many solutions for it. And then, you know, we don't actually have heal. You know, heal is a very basic ability on a priest where you just, it takes a little while to cast, it doesn't cost a lot of mana, but it is just a nice little chunk of healing. We don't have anything like that. You know, they've gone so far across to the heal over time things that, you know, we don't have something. I mean, Shadowlands Gift was what we had in Legion with the legendary weapon, and it was a long cast, but it was a big bomb of a heal as well. If you really, you know, your tank was at 10% and you just cocooned them, you could just bomb Shadowlands Gift them and bring them straight back up again. But you could have something like that, or you could have something like Effuse, which is a much, much smaller heal, and it wasn't particularly expensive, but, you know, it just topped them a little off a little more than what Renewing Mist would do, because, you know, sometimes, you know, someone's at lost 15% of the health, and you know, you'll toss a renewing mist. It would be nice just to top them off so you could move on to other things. We don't really have anything like that. Before you say Vivify, I kind of regard that more as a cleave type heal, just because of the way it's been designed to interact with renewing mist. Yes, you can use it, but it is rather expensive. Now I want to move on to what I call the Precious Relics of Mistweaver's past. These are abilities that we used to have which have been taken away for some reason, and we could probably do with getting back again. The Great Unpruning wasn't all that kind to Mistweavers in the first place, so you know, I was just thinking along the lines of these particular abilities. Now the top one is an obvious one, and one that you've probably very much recognised yourself, and something that we really do need back. Please, for the love of potato, give a Spearhand Strike back. For those of you who don't know, Spearhand Strike was an interrupt that we could use at melee range to interrupt enemy casts. And for some reason it's been taken away from every healer apart from the Wind Shear ability on Shaman. Now this is a very unfair distinction to make in the first place. And you know, second of all, you know, it does kind of put healers in a position where they have to either pseudo-interrupt with paralysis, do a leg sweep. You know, they're not doing an actual interrupt per se, it's an incapacitate, a stun. Everyone else, you know, the Brewmasters get an interrupt, the Windwalkers get an interrupt. The Mistweavers have forgotten how to use spears. And you know, it's just fundamentally unfair. If you have two casted abilities going off at once, one is lethal and one isn't lethal, I guarantee you the DPS will interrupt the non-lethal one. And you better hope that you have something for this one over here. Just return it. Now I did hint at mentioning Mana Tea in this video, and I'm going to mention it now. Mana Tea was an ability that, you know, we're going to Mana Tea, what are you talking about? Yeah, we have a form of Mana Tea. You know, it is very nice for what it is, you know, but it's not the Mana Tea that I'm thinking of. The Mana Tea I'm thinking of was a couple of expansions back, and basically you just built up stacks of Mana Tea as a reserve, and then when you felt like it, you just had a sip of Mana Tea and you would restore some of the mana that you had spent. Now, even back then, it was like the exchange was actually between chi and mana. So you know, that obviously wouldn't work this time. We would have to use mana and mana, but I would propose that, you know, the amount of mana you get back isn't as much as the mana that you've been spending, but it does give you the opportunity to have your own sort of self-innovate, if you like. You'd have a lot more control over your mana, and it would alleviate a lot of the mana conservation issues that we already have by giving us Mana Tea back in that form. This one is just a personal preference of mine, but I do remember with great fondness and sometimes with horrendous memories about the ability to chi torpedo through things and damage and heal them. It was an actual talent. I think back in Mr. Pandari, I think. And you could actually chi torpedo and it would heal and damage everyone in there. So, you know, you'd be in melee and you'd be chi torpedoing through. It was great fun. Of course, it was less fun, you know, when you were going through a pack of mobs and you're trying not to attract any attention to yourself, and you chi torpedo and inadvertently pull 5 or 6 outraged animals on top of you. But so, you know, it wasn't perfect all of the time, but you know, I think this is just part of my long-standing love affair with chi torpedo, and you know, I would like it to be just a little bit more interesting. Put it back to the way that it was back then. Zen Meditation I have mentioned a couple of times before as a possibility as a raid cooldown, and you know, this ability did exist. I mean, I think it was a little OP. Maybe that's why I got taken away from Mistweavers. But you know, as you can see, it was an ability where you channeled it like you do in a Brewmaster, and you would basically redirect all the damage that would come to you instead, from your party or your raid. And you'll get a 90% damage reduction, of course. So, you know, that would be a wonderful piece of utility that we could use both in Mythic Plus and in raids, and it would just, you know, make us a much more attractive option, because now your raid leader's got the option of Zen Meditation too. Makes us more tempting. I mentioned a fuse earlier as, you know, just a very small top-up heal basically. That wasn't particularly expensive. I'm not talking about Surging Mist here, which was, you know, far more like flash heal, you know, emergency, oh, must fill you. No, I'm just thinking about a fuse, just a dip, dip, dip. And I thought, it could interact with Renewing Mist as well. So, it could be slightly more powerful if Renewing Mist is already on there, which would give you another incentive, to keep with that whole, if Renewing Mist is on this target, you're going to get more out of it kind of synergy thing going on. And finally, there was a talent back in the day called Zen Pulse. Now, I would do a variant of this. Basically, you'd either cast it on yourself or you cast it on another player, and it would pulse out damage and healing. And, the damage itself was, relatively good. The healing was relatively but it was just another way of, providing that. It was particularly good. I found it particularly useful in dungeons, but, you could even have the ability, if you wanted, say, have a ramp-up time where it's relatively weak the first time it's cast out, but the time it hits 10 seconds, you have the option just to pulse it out. You get an actual burst of damage and healing. I think that would be an awful lot of fun. Kind of like a Zen bomb, really. So, there's another opportunity. They could definitely put that into the talent tree, because there are certainly some talents there that are either completely obsolete or are so obviously either Mythic Plus or Raid that they could have just another option. It'd also be rather useful just out in the field. Stick it on yourself, pull a whole pack of mobs, wait for 10 seconds, press the button, and boom. So to finish up, let's do a bit of brainstorming, come up with a few ideas, and how we can make some minor adjustments. First of all, of course, you could just give all of those abilities back. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm certainly going to be bothering Blizzard about it anyway. I look forward to being back. Anyway, Soothing Mist. Now, Soothing Mist, at the moment, if you're a Mistweaver, you're probably not using it at all, because it just doesn't fit into that rotation whatsoever. You would use it a little bit more when you're Mistweaving, but it is a pretty underwhelming ability in general. It's the sort of thing you'd use if you took, Statue for Mythic Plus runs and stuff like that. I would like to give it a little bit more ability, so maybe it's a single target minor damage reduction. Even if it's just 5%, but you channel that in, and they've got other heals going on them, and they're taking slightly less damage. Let's make it a little bit more useful and interesting. Essence Font. Now, I personally have a rather difficult relationship with Essence Font, and I don't think I'm alone in the whole of the Mistweaver community in thinking that Essence Font really does stand out like a sore thumb when it comes to other abilities. Now, we already do have a version of AoE healing in a raid, which could be expanded upon, but namely, you could give Renewing Mist an additional charge and spread Renewing Mist out all over the entire raid, and then Vivify Cleave. We'd get more bang for a buck out of the Vivify themselves, so it would justify the mana cost more, but that would render Essence Font essentially useless. I'm going to say that's not entirely a bad thing. It's a very pretty ability, and I like the way that it works with the mastery and stuff. But in general, it's always been a very uncomfortable ability in the Mistweaver toolkit for me. I mean, I just don't like it very much, and I've not liked it since it was first implemented. So I think there is an opportunity there to sort of expand the Renewing Mist Vivify story. Or even bring in another ability altogether. I'm not keen of its design. I'm not keen on the way that it works, and I don't think it really fits into the whole Mistweaver thing. This next one kind of ties into Essence Font once again, because I'm struggling to understand why they actually attached it to the Ancient Teachings of the Monastery Legendary. The way the Ancient Teachings of the Monastery Legendary works is that every time you channel Essence Font, all of your abilities after that will, for I think 15 seconds, your Rising Sun kicks, your Tiger Palms, your Blackout kicks will do healing for 250% of the damage that you do. It's great healing, don't get me wrong, it's a great legendary, but it really doesn't need Essence Font to be there. First of all, Essence Font is only really there as, in the same way that Iron Skin Brew was up there for Brewmasters, it's just a maintenance buff. You're never really wanting to get that dropped off, the Ancient Teachings of the Monastery Legendary, so you're using Essence Font even when you don't need to, which is a bit of a waste of mana. Second of all, Essence Font is value is debatable in Mythic Plus to start with, but you'll actually have to click the channel in order to get in, because you don't really want to wait for the end cast of Essence Font. You'll get far more punchy healing out of actually interrupting it and then going straight to Rising Sun Kick. So now you're wasting mana on a class that is already having mana issues. So it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't need to be like an upkeep thing. You know, you can just put these things on and there you go. You don't need this additional button. It has absolutely no relation whatsoever to fist weaving, and it's just been put in there, and I think it's probably time it went away. I think we probably need to remove Expel Harm altogether, or, you know, actually make it worth using again. It's a very sad situation that Expel Harm finds itself on a Mistweaver at the moment, because, you know, it's relatively expensive and for what it actually does, and it's a self-heal. I would substantially increase the self-healing that it does, make it more of a desperate prayer kind of ability, and probably halve its mana cost. And, you know, you might actually find Mistweavers using this as a pseudo healing elixir. And, you know, we can put something else on the talent tree other than healing elixir, which most people don't take anyway in the first place. Now, ambitious idea, certainly. I wouldn't see it being implemented in any patches, I don't think. But I do like the stance idea. You know, you'd have the aspect of the red crane, you have the aspect, I think, of the serpent, and those would be your two distinct styles, and then you could, basically the bars would shift over. It does take an awful lot of getting used to, and you have to be very comfortable with, you know, the idea of stance dancing in modern World of Warcraft. So, you know, but you could get additional bonuses out of that as well. So, you know, you would be, say in Stance of the Red Crane, you would be doing a lot more of the fist weaving stuff. Your actual damaging abilities would be far more potent. But if you went to Stance of the Serpent, then you'd be much more in the background, and probably your direct heals would be a lot more potent instead. So, you know, it's just something that I was thinking of. And this next one is, you know, basically to mirror what Windwalkers bring. You know, they bring a passive called Windwalking. So, you know, to your raid or to your party, to your dungeon group, where you do 10% increased speed, all of you. So, you know, that's rather useful when you're timing keys and all those sorts of things. So I was thinking, you know, Mistweavers could also bring something, you know, a raid-wide passive, a party-wide passive, which would also be rather useful too. So I would think it would have to be something along the lines of a resource reduction cost. So it would be a very, very minor one, but, you know, it would, you would have a chance to get back 1-2% of either your mana, your energy, your rage, anything basically your spender abilities. Well, when you have a Mistweaver in the raid. I was thinking something like that, so, you know, when it comes to raid time, it's like, well, they've got Zen Meditation now, that's very useful, but they could also bring back this refund, you know, would get additional resources, it would add up quite nicely over the course of longer fights. It would definitely be much more useful in raids than in Mythic Plus, but, you know, it just gives people another incentive to bring Mistweavers, which I think is probably needed. And finally, statue baseline, but, you know, I have this same argument with Brewmasters. You know, I think the Ox should be baseline too, as it's kind of important to the whole thing. It's kind of, you know, base ability of that particular spec, and statue is ours for Mistweaver. So, you know, I really do think it would help in single target healing as well, and, you know, Soothing Mist becomes a little more potent as a result. I think they should bring statue back baseline. So yes, there it is. I think I've rambled on for long enough. You know, let me know what you think with these ideas, you know, and start to get a little bit of momentum on this, and, you know, start making forum posts and Twitter posts and poking them with the stick, and, you know, just generally bothering them, because it looks like 9.1 is some distance away, so we're going to have the opportunity to get in there, give them some feedback, and see if we can make some minor adjustments to Mistweavers just to make our lives a little better. I mean, it's already pretty amazing being a Mistweaver, but, you know, we've got to approach it from the other side of the fence, where people are looking at Mistweavers and saying, I'd rather have someone else, and that's just not where we want to be right now. Anyway, I will, you know, as usual, like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you next time. Until then, I'm the conspicuous Moo. And I think there's a Mistweaver behind you. Now I just want to move on to what I call the precious...